After thousands of children have died in Gaza, the question of whether or not Britain should welcome refugees, including children, from the region seems a clear one. But somehow, not everyone agrees. Here's right-wing political commentator Matthew Goodwin debating the issue with Tribune co-editor Taj Ali.
We are talking about millions of Palestinians. We never make generalizations. And if we're talking about a population where half of whom are children, are you really saying to me a 10-year-old Palestinian who might be severely injured, who might need urgent medical treatment, is a threat to this country? I think we have counter-terrorism laws in this country to make sure that
why is a 10-year-old Palestinian going to be a threat?
I think, as I say, I think the underlying principle of taking more people into Britain from Palestine, from Gaza,
not a single Palestinian child where you could save a life. What crime has a Palestinian child committed?
We can get very abstract about it.
It's not abstract.
This is central to the issue because we're talking about children. We're talking about bringing children to reunite them with their families.
I'm not going to be bullied by liberal tears on this one, okay?
I won't be bullied by liberal tears. Wow. Again, what always strikes me about these right-wing, self-styled tough guys is that he's dismissing the humanity here of people who have survived the most unimaginable assault on their existence, who have more strength in their pinky toe than 1,000 Matthew Goodwins could ever have, as far as I'm concerned, who have had to live in conditions that people like Matthew Goodwin wouldn't tolerate for 5 minutes. Yet he is sitting from a comfortable studio in London and under the most gentle pushing, literally just, hey, what you're saying here basically means that you're against 10-year-old children being able to seek safety from a war that they have nothing to do with. Isn't that a little bit screwed up? And he immediately feels bullied? Okay, then. Just to give you a bit more detail on exactly what Matthew Goodwin is opposing here, this segment was about whether the government should establish a special visa scheme for Palestinians with family in the UK. The Gaza Families Reunited scheme would be a cost-free visa route, enabling people from Gaza to stay with their UK-based relatives with a right to return to Gaza when it is safe to do so. This would be modelled on the Ukraine Family Scheme, under which more than 250,000 Ukrainians were granted British visas. Now, given that many of the bombs being dropped in Gaza are at least partially made by British companies in British factories, it seems like pretty much the least we could do. Indeed, Matthew Goodwin himself was all for the Ukrainian refugee scheme. In a piece for the Daily Mail last year on migration numbers between 2022 and 2023, he said this. In the 12-month period involved, for example, Britain took in 33,000 refugees from the war in Ukraine. Another 47,000 came from Hong Kong in the wake of the clampdown there. Both represent humanitarian gestures that we should celebrate. So given a model like this already exists for Ukrainians, it's really hard to justify why the same shouldn't be offered to Palestinians. Unless, of course, you think there is something uniquely different or sinister about Palestinian people, regardless of their circumstances. Here's another clip from the BBC segment.
I would say, how about neighbouring countries do a bit more?
I find that's an abhorrent statement.
How about neighbouring countries?
Don't all talk over each other, Matt. Don't shout over everyone.
Do a little bit more, because you know what I care about? I care about the British Jewish community. How do they feel? Opening the door to more Palestinians, for people who are supportive of Hamas.
They're not.
The downplaying of Hamas on this show, by the way, is outrageous. It's an extremist Islamist organisation. The marching, the expression of sympathy for Hamas in this country has been outrageous. And I would expect Labour, after everything you went through with Jeremy Corbyn, just to be a little bit more sensitive on this issue and stick up for British.
Well, let Rachel speak.
Okay. We are talking about children coming to this country, children who have got nothing. They have been moved from place to place in Gaza at the moment. They are coming to be with their mother or their father who are here in the UK. A very limited scheme for a short period of time until the horrific bombing of Gaza comes to an end. These are innocent civilians. These aren't people who are terrorists. These are people that want to be with their mummy and daddy and to have some sort of life. And I'm afraid that is the reality of what we are asking for.
Right.
So Palestinians are being kettled in an open-air prison, bombed, starved, and dispossessed by British, American, and Israeli-made weapons, but we can't let them seek refuge because Palestinians are just the wrong kind of refugee. This idea that the existence of Palestinians in Britain would make Jewish people or anyone unsafe is a preposterous, dangerous, and racist trope. It frames Palestinians as barbaric, uncivilized, and as not part of broader humanity. It sets Palestinians up as deserving of their own murder and dispossession. And within that framework, no claims to innocence can actually truly penetrate. It doesn't matter if you are, as Taj and Labour MP Rachel Maskell describe, a 10-year-old child who needs to be with their parents. You can be the perfect victim. But until the core racist binary of the barbarian versus the civilized is broken, we're just going to be stuck in this endless loop where one group of people get to decide on a whim whether other groups of people live or die. Rivka, what do you make of that shocking segment on Politics Live today?
I really wish Matthew Goodwin had asked me, this British Jew, how I felt when he wrote a whole book about how elites were taking over the world. You know, I think Priti Patel called them the North London Metropolitan Liberal elite. You know, this is a man who, you know, if he was saying the same stuff 100 years ago, it would have been about my grandparents. It just so happens that, geopolitics has shifted and his targets are Palestinian or brown or people coming here on small boats. This man is not an ally of Jews. And it's really funny, isn't it, how you can see in that clip as he's scrambling for a sort of virtuous explanation. Because at first, when Taj first questions him, he's like, yeah, well, you know, we don't need more people coming to this country because he's anti-immigration. So that's his real reason. Then he goes to a concern about security. These people are going to, bomb us in our beds or whatever, these 7-year-olds that come here to be reunited with their families. And then when all else fails and it's clear he's losing his audience, he's like, well, what about British Jews? As if he gives a shit about British Jews. Like, get fucked, man. Like, this guy has absolutely no interest. He's said explicitly that he thinks multiculturalism has failed. The idea that he's now somehow a great defender of British Jews is like an absolute joke. You know, I think that this debate is an important one for the very same reason as, you know, people say that it's important to scrutinize double standards that Israel is supposedly held to. The Palestine visa scheme is designed, I think, quite deliberately to mirror the Ukraine scheme in an attempt to obviously help some hundreds, maybe even thousands of Palestinians, but also as a sort of, you know, way of drawing attention to the double standards to which Britain and its citizens hold Palestinians. Because, you know, not a few months ago, and indeed to this day, we are accepting thousands and thousands of people from Ukraine or from Hong Kong, which I think is perfectly legitimate. But this proposal of an equivalent scheme for Palestinians shows us up, doesn't it? Because it shows that really the only distinguishing factor between these two groups is that one is brown and one is white, or in the case of Hong Kong, kind of subjects of the colony. I think this is actually a really important debate to be having, because it kind of, it just is exactly on that razor line at which racism operates in this country. The sort of plausible deniability of security reasons and terror and sort of threats of terrorism just don't wash. I think, as Taj said in that clip, we have counter-terror laws in this country, just as we've prohibited quite recently settlers in the West Bank from coming to the UK. You know, Hamas has been a prescribed terror organization since 2001. The police have got seemingly infinite resources to investigate and prosecute people for things like calling someone a coconut, let alone being a paid up member of Hamas. You know, the likelihood that someone's going to slip through the net on their way in, I think, given the virtual lockdown, the police lockdown that we're under, you know, and have been, you know, increasingly for years now, is minuscule. Like, there is no way that somebody is going to somehow slip through the net. And I think, as this panelist on Politics Live was also pointing out, the majority of these people are going to be women and children reuniting with their families here. So I think, you know, Matthew Goodwin, I hugely encourage people to look up his kind of previous form on particularly, you know, immigration and elites. And he's just so adjacent to the far right and gives it this kind of respectable gloss, which is why he still gets platforms on the BBC in places like The Guardian. But really, he should be regarded as, you know, akin ideologically to someone like Tommy Robinson. He's just able to talk the talk a lot better.
Yeah, I think what strikes me there is that when you've got this prevailing logic that there is literally nothing a Palestinian can do to make certain institutions, people, entities see them as deserving humans, then like where do you go from that? How do you negotiate with that? But I also think, Rivka, that your drawing of historical parallels there is really powerful, because let's not forget the Refugee Convention, which people like Matthew Goodwin have fought tooth and nail. I mean, I don't know if he specifically fought tooth and nail, but that kind of milieu of anti-immigration people have, fought tooth and nail to weaken the Refugee Convention. The Refugee Convention was introduced because pre-World War II, Jewish people who were fleeing Nazi Germany were turned away from British borders because of the exact kind of language that is now being used against Palestinians. This idea that there's something inherently different, there's something inherently threatening, there's something to be inherently stigmatized about, and even like to the language, the language of invasion, the way that refugees and immigrants are talked about. That was the premise and the principles on which Jewish people fleeing the Nazis were turned away from British borders. That's why we have the Refugee Convention now. And so the irony that you're invoking that in order to continue the very kinds of mentality and the kinds of ideology that caused that historical stain on this country's, legacy, a historical stain in this country's past. I mean, it's historical illiteracy at best, and it's just, completely manipulative and misleading at worst. I mean, it's a lot of other things at worst, but I'm not going to go into that now. You guys get the picture. You're a smart audience. You know what I'm saying.